Just a moment. All right, looks like we got everyone in the room now. All right. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining us today. This is our first webinar of 2025. And so we're glad to be back for the new year. I'm Tina Barr, the Director of Training and Education for the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. NACOLE is an organization that works to create a community of support for independent civilian oversight entities seeking to make their law enforcement agencies, jails, and prisons more transparent, accountable, and responsive to the communities they serve. One part of that effort is our webinar series. Since 2015, NACOLE has worked to bring you information on effective practices in civilian oversight, innovations in the field, and efforts to reform the criminal legal system throughout the webinar series. All right, so just a few logistics before we turn to the webinar. First, you do have the ability to turn on the captions by using the button at the bottom of your screen. Next, everyone has entered the webinar in listen-only mode, which means that the chat featured is disabled. However, if you have a question at any time, you can use the Q&A function to enter it there. To ensure that our speaker today, Casey, has time to cover all the information that he's prepared, we'll hold the questions until he's finished with the prepared remarks, okay? Everyone does have the ability to upvote questions, and so by upvoting questions, that moves the most pressing questions up to the head of the queue, and so we'll try to get to those as many as we can before the end of the hour. Now, something new that we implemented in 2024 that seems to be going well, and we will continue doing it, is to host a 30-minute post-webinar discussion immediately after the 1-hour webinar. And so if you're interested in joining that, towards the end of the webinar, I will post in the chat. I can use the chat to send messages to the entire audience. I will post the link for that Zoom discussion in the chat. And so you will have to, once you click on the Zoom link, you will log out of this webinar automatically and be directed to the Zoom discussion room. And so please be on the lookout for that link towards the end of the presentation, and I will point that out as well before we log off the webinar. Okay, finally, the webinar is being recorded and it will be available to everyone who has registered for the webinar for 3 months. And you will receive an email within 5 days of today with instructions on how to access the recording and some other information. Okay, now moving on to the webinar, which is titled Digital Video Evidence, Identifying Technical Challenges and Limitations. This webinar is designed for non-experts navigating the complexities of digital video evidence. It delves into the technical hurdles and limitations critical to responsibly examining and processing multimedia evidence for investigative purposes. By the end of the webinar, you'll have a deeper appreciation for the intricacies of this field and understand why proper training is essential to avoid missteps. It is my pleasure to introduce the speaker today, Casey Yunko. Casey is not the first time he's presenting a webinar with NACOLE. I know some of you attended the webinar that he did back in September 2023. Which is available on the NACOLE website if you're interested in that. But it was also about digital video evidence, and I guess it's a prelude to today's webinar. Casey is a certified forensic video technician who joined the Axon team with 20 years of experience in video and multimedia. He spent 6 years as a criminalist, specializing in forensic video examination at the Denver Police Department Crime Laboratory in Denver, Colorado. And during that time, he performed well over 1,300 video evidence extractions and examinations for investigations ranging from simple criminal mischief and auto theft to homicide, robbery, and all other major crimes investigations. So he has a great deal of experience in what he's about to present to you on today. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Casey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tina. And thank you so much to the NACOLE organization for inviting me and inviting me back today to present to you all. And thank you to all of the attendees today. I was very thrilled to hear that there was a lot of excitement about today's webinar and presentation. So again, thank you to all of you for having me. Um, with that said, if you had a chance to review or attend my previous webinar that I did in 2023, we talked about collecting and safeguarding your video evidence. Now, I won't lie, it was my plan to cover all three of these topics that you see on your screen in the time that I had in that last webinar, and I only got through the first third of that. So I'm going to pick up where I left off last time. We talked about collecting video and safeguarding our evidence after it comes off those digital video evidence systems. And we're going to kind of go on to the next step, talking about how to deal with this digital video evidence when it comes to your examination and your analysis of this information. Now, much like last time, there's a lot of topics that we're going to cover today, and I could easily spend this entire webinar talking about just one of these aspects or topics that we'll cover today. Probably could teach a 4-hour class on each one of these specific topics. So we're going to take a pretty high level 10,000 foot view of a lot of these tools and these topics. It is not my goal for you to leave this webinar thinking that you're a forensic video expert or anything of that nature, but I hope that those that are already familiar with some of these topics might learn something new or maybe refresh your memory or your experience on something from the past. And then, of course, if you are really new to these concepts, I hope that you can walk away from this with a better understanding of the intricacies of digital video evidence and digital video data. Um, these concepts and these tools intrigue more study and more research. I hope that you can leave this webinar with an understanding of I want to go learn more. I want to attend more webinars. Maybe I want to go and get training and obtain one of these certifications to have a better understanding of this forensic science of video examination. Um, with that said, we're going to dive into identifying digital video limitations. And again, I don't have a whole lot of time, so we're going to dive in and we're going to dive into the most obvious place, which is space. And you're probably thinking, what on earth does space have anything to do with digital video evidence? Just bear with me. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. You might be familiar with this image. Back in 2021, the James Webb Telescope was deployed and started transmitting these amazing images from space of distant galaxies, etc. Now, astrophysicists and astronomers use these images to answer the most complex questions about our universe and our place in the galaxy. Now, these images probably don't mean much to an individual like you and I because we're not astrophysicists or we're not astronomers. Maybe you are. I definitely am not. But the reason I bring this up is these images that we're looking at were captured 1 billion light years away of these planets, of these galaxies, of these solar systems, stars, etc. Um, Images like these are pretty foreign to us, and they don't necessarily apply to the type of work that we do. And the reason is these are the type of images that we deal with on a regular basis. These are the type of images that we use to answer the most complex questions that we have about our cases, about our investigations. Um, Now, the reason I bring this up, A, it's funny, and B, it's true. 60% of the digital video evidence that we deal with in our investigations and our cases are of this quality. Now, mind you, 1 billion light years away, 20 feet. This individual is 20 feet away from the camera that is capturing these images. So, um, again, it's important for me to bring this up because the type of information that we're dealing with on a regular basis when it comes to digital video evidence is of this quality. Now, uh, a lot of our research over the few years, or the last few years, have yielded information that 80% of all of our criminal investigations involve digital video evidence. And that digital video evidence per case is normally originated from three different sources. We're seeing video come off more commonly from CCTV systems, from cell phones, body worn cameras, in car cameras, home security systems. If you happen to catch my last webinar, I think right before I presented, I read an article at that point in time in 2023. It was speculated that 46% of all doorbells in the United States capture and retain video. That is a lot of information that's available to us. Now, to quote a forensic scientist, I was introduced to this quote early on in my training, and I've kept it with me for a long time. I actually have this magnet on my refrigerator reminding me of this point every day. The physical evidence cannot be wrong. It cannot perjure itself, and it cannot be entirely absent. Only its interpretation can be incorrect. Only human failure to find it, to study it, and understand it can diminish its value. Very impactful quote. And the reason I have the word interpretation highlighted there is because that's the overarching topic that we're going to talk about today. Digital video evidence is accessible to anyone at any time. We're not talking about DNA. We're not talking about fingerprint and latent print examinations. We're talking about digital video that's in the palm of our hand at any point, at any time of the day, that's accessible. But it is the interpretations that we make on the contents of this digital video that ultimately leads to the opinions that we provide of that content. And those opinions that we provide on that content is ultimately, what pushes our cases forward. It pushes our investigations forward. And those opinions and those interpretations are often what are argued in court between defense and prosecution. Um, and our interpretation of this information is so critical if we understand why that information or that data or that video is what it is. There are a lot of pitfalls based on the technical aspects of video that can actually lead us to making the wrong interpretation, which leads to making the wrong or offering the wrong opinions. And God forbid we land in the hot seat in court, and we can't answer to the technical limitations and the technical challenges of this evidence that we used to form these interpretations and these opinions. So I'm going to show you kind of the quintessential example of this. This is a case that basically launched the Input Ace tool, now known as Axon Investigate. And I will warn you what we're about to watch. Some of you maybe you've seen this video before, but what we're about to watch is rather violent, not necessarily gory or anything of that nature. But if you're not interested in seeing a violent video at this point, I would say probably not pay attention to the webinar for the next 10 minutes. Maybe fast forward through it if you're watching this recorded another time. But with that said, a little background on this case. This came to from our friends up north in Ottawa. We had 911 dispatch some officers to a restaurant in which a male subject was inside that restaurant, making physical and verbal threats towards the employees as well as the customers. Now, upon police presence on scene, this individual fled and a foot pursuit ensued. Were ultimately stopped near a construction area. This individual picked up a piece of rebar and then became aggressive with the officers. So the officers then had to take the proper means necessary to disarm this individual and to get him into custody. And the video that we're about to watch was captured from the vestibule of an apartment complex that captured this arrest. So I'm going to go ahead and play it. We'll go ahead and watch through this. Now, obviously, what we're seeing, as I'd mentioned, we're seeing a pretty violent arrest. You see the officers using their batons and using physical force to get this individual into custody, especially here at the end where this officer slams this individual down on the ground. It looks like his head bounces off the concrete. Just an overall pretty violent takedown. Now, unfortunately, a couple of days after this arrest took place, this individual passed away in police custody. Now, obviously, that triggered a use of force investigation through internal affairs. Um, this video that we're watching was used in court, was used against these officers. It was presented to a pathologist who actually used this video to opine on the cause of death. And started a domino effect of some challenges. Now, it turns out that the internal affairs investigators that worked on this case struggled with that video as it was collected from that CCTV system, mainly because it was in a proprietary format that required a proprietary player to be installed onto that computer to play back that file. You couldn't just share it with anybody on a thumb drive and they launch it immediately on their computer and watch it back. So what they did is they used a third-party tool to basically do a screen recording of that proprietary player playing that video on their desktop. They recorded that video, they generated a standard MP4 file, and they then started, handing that off to the defense through the discovery process, etc. Again, it was shown to a pathologist who used it to opine on the cause of death. It was shared out to the media that led to public backlash. You can see some protests outside of the police agency here. And ultimately was being used in court against the officer facing now homicide charges against this individual. The investigators didn't know what they didn't know. They didn't have the proper understanding of the training to understand the pitfall, as I stated earlier, of just doing that screen recording of that video file being played back by the proprietary player. Now, fast forward into the trial, this officer, of course, hired his own defense counsel, and that counsel hired an expert like myself to come in and look at this video evidence. The first thing that they noticed is it was a standard MP4 file, and they said, hey, is this the original evidence? Is this the original file that was recovered off that system? If you remember in my previous webinar talking about video acquisition, step one is to always do what you possibly can to get the proprietary native file off that system. Try not to get any type of converted file from those systems, and we'll talk about why here a little bit more. But they said, yes, you're right. This isn't the original file. They provided him or her with that original file, which happened to be a .psf file. Now, using Input Ace, as it was at the time, now Axon Investigate, they dragged and dropped that file in there and got forensically sound instant playback of that information. And that video, viewed in a forensically sound way, tells a much different story about how things took place in that arrest. The first thing you may notice is the officers don't look as squished as they did before, because we're actually viewing this video in the proper aspect ratio. It turns out that the proprietary player was designed in such a shoddy manner that it didn't even play the video back in the proper aspect ratio, meaning the height and width. So of course, since they did that screen recording of the proprietary video playing or player playing it back, they recorded it in the wrong aspect ratio. Now here at the end, where the individual is taken down to the ground, it no longer appears that that officer is slamming this individual into the ground. It no longer appears that this individual's head is bouncing off the concrete. You can actually see the officer showing restraint to put this individual on the ground in a manner that wasn't as violent as it appeared. Now, what had happened is that proprietary player was dropping frames, meaning that it wasn't visually showing all of the images that make that video what it is, which fabricated that use of force of that individual traveling a shorter amount of distance in a shorter amount of time, appearing as if that individual was slamming on the ground and their head was bouncing off the concrete. Now, obviously, when this was presented, all the charges were dropped on the officer. The medical examiner that opined on the cause of death based on a video, I believe, got in a lot of trouble. Obviously, they shouldn't have been rendering an opinion on a video. If they're a medical examiner, they should have rendered an opinion on the medical examination that they performed. But again, just the perfect example of how we can misinterpret the contents of the video by not understanding the technical limitations of that digital evidence. So that gets us into our big topic, starting with identifying technical challenges and limitations. Not all video is created equal, right? That's the big takeaway that we get today. Now, there are a lot of tools that are available out there that we can use to view video, to analyze video, to examine video. I'm not here to sell you on Axon Investigate, obviously, because of my history and my employer. I have a little bit of a bias. This is one of my favorite tools, but understand that there are a lot of helpful tools out there for video analysis. I've always been a strong believer in that not any one tool is the perfect tool, right? If you've ever gone into a mechanic's garage, you probably find 3 or 4 screwdrivers that look exactly like the same screwdriver. But if you talk to that mechanic about it, he'll tell you exactly the difference between each screwdriver and what the application is for each one of those tools. Same thing dealing with video analysis. Some of these applications and these software applications are better for reading those proprietary native file formats without the need of installing or fumbling around with those proprietary players. Some of these tools have more extensive features built in to analyze and to enhance video. And I use the word enhance. Don't not one of my favorite words, but just for the sake of conversation, that's what we use today. But to brighten a video up or to maybe slow it down so you can see it frame by frame. And then a lot of these tools have some really great features when working with demonstratives and exhibits for courtroom presentation to be able to present this evidence and this data in the best light that you possibly can. You can see some of these examples here on your screen from Axon Investigate. But again, getting a tool that provides you that proper framework that you can click with confidence, knowing that you're viewing this data and this evidence in its best form, in its truest light. So the first challenge that we're going to talk about is compression. Now, I'm not going to bore everybody by talking about digital video compression. This is one of those topics that a 4 to 6 hour class could be taught on just the technical details and aspects of how compression works. So again, we're going to keep it high level. I'm not going to put anybody to sleep today, I swear. And just going to give you a quick introduction. Now, what is compression? It is the process of reducing the space required to store data, as well as the reduce the data size for transmission. One of the perfect and best examples are cell phones. Our cell phones can compress the snot out of so much of this data, and we can store a lot on such a small device with such a small storage device inside that phone. Videos, photos, they are compressed in a manner so we can save as many photos and videos of our family and loved ones on our phone that we can to share on social media, whatever. Digital video is the same thing on these CCTV systems. Now, there's two really main types of compression that we need to take into consideration, and I'll talk about this real quickly. I got my laser pointer here. The first one is spatial compression. Now, what spatial compression is doing, it's an algorithm that's going to analyze all of the pixels and all of the color values around any specific area and say, hey, what can I reuse to keep the size of this file down as much as I possibly can so I can store as much information on this hard drive as I can. Obviously, when you dive into the pixels of this individual's pants, we know that this individual's pants isn't blocky. He's not a Pac-Man character, but this is a visual representation of that spatial compression that's happening. The algorithm is looking at these data blocks here and blocks of pixels and saying, what is these common color values that we can reuse to try and shrink down the size of this image or ultimately this video. This leads to issues. As you can see visually, again, this individual's pants aren't blocky like that. It's just kind of over compressed and it's of low quality. I've seen a case example where an individual on a motorcycle flies through an intersection, unfortunately hits the side of a bus, and investigators were trying to identify the speed at which that motorcycle was traveling. As they were doing a frame by frame analysis of this, they had a tough time determining where the motorcycle was at any given time because it was so small on the screen that, we're really only looking at these blocks. Remember, we're not looking at photos of space from billions of light years away. We got low resolution video that we're trying to find out. This makes it incredibly hard to get license plates, to read logos. Clearly there's something on this individual's jacket. He or she may even be wearing some type of mask. I don't know. But again, it limits me from interpreting this information and drawing any kind of opinion to say that is male or female, that they have something on their face, or they might have a patch on this jacket. I don't know. Again, that quintessential, be careful of the interpretation of your video if you don't understand exactly what you're looking at from a technical aspect. Now, the second type of compression is called temporal compression. What that does is it's going to break your video down into images. So you have what are called iframes, those are your info frames, and you have p frames, which are predictive frames, and there's binary frames. We don't need to get into that. Um, but what it's going to do is it's going to make a keyframe here with this iframe and say, okay, this is what the image is going to look like. Now the next, let's say 5 images, just depending on how the compression is set up in that particular system, it's only going to look at what's changed between that image and that iframe, that original image. And it's going to say, oh, well, everything here in green, if we were to do a macro block analysis on this video, say everything here in green changed, but everything here in pink didn't. So just reuse all of those pixels and that information from the first image. So if I were to do a macro block analysis on this, meaning just show me what changed from frame to frame, everything in pink would be black and everything in green would be the image because that's what changed from the last image. So again, it's just constantly referencing back to that iframe and reusing this imagery. Now, that same motorcycle case that I was explaining, as they were going through that frame by frame, they found a frame in which that motorcycle was in 2 places at one time because of the limitations of that temporal compression that was being used by that specific camera system. So obviously, if we're trying to determine speed on an object in a video, how can I confidently make that interpretation and render that opinion if I can't explain why that motorcycle is in 2 places at the same time? There isn't a glitch in the matrix. There's a glitch in that video compression. So, I won't necessarily say, it's up to the individual on their specific training and their know-how. If they wanted to continue to move forward with that speed determination, maybe they have a tool that I've never heard of. I was never a traffic guy. I didn't do too many examinations like that, but I promise you that is going to be questioned in court. Why do we see this motorcycle in 2 places at one time on one frame of this video, right? And you need to know how to explain that. So not understanding compression, you may not catch those types of things, and again, lead to an inappropriate interpretation of that content. Next, we'll talk about aspect ratios. In the example with the officers that we looked at earlier, I talked about how that proprietary player was not displaying those images using the proper aspect ratio. What is aspect ratio? It is the ratio between the width and the height of an image. So you have, for example, this yellow aspect ratio here, 704 by 480, was a standard definition video. What that number means is you have 704 rows of pixels going up and down, and you have 480 rows of pixels going horizontally side to side. That is what that aspect ratio is. Now, Here lies the big confusion. These CCTV systems and these video systems uh, can work in different aspect ratios as it's performing its services or its work, for lack of a better phrase, as it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And by that I mean there is a pixel aspect ratio, there is a picture aspect ratio, there is what is referred to as a sample aspect ratio. This 2CIF here that we see very common on standard definition analog systems is a good example of a sample aspect ratio in which the system is sampling 704 by 240. So again, 240 rows of pixels across. That's its sample aspect ratio. But when that DVR plays the video back, or when the proprietary video plays it back, it actually doubles these lines going from side to side. So now you go from 704 to 480 because it's just doubled each row of those pixels, so you don't have a squashed looking video. So if you don't understand that, you need to know why your images may look the way they do, because it could greatly affect your interpretation. If you imagine that if we're simply looking at the sample aspect ratio, somebody that is tall and slender, squished down like this may look short and stocky. I've seen it affect interpretations on vehicles. A Lincoln Town Car might look quite different if it's, smushed down or if it's stretched out. Am I looking at a Lincoln Town Car or am I looking at a Prius? Probably the worst comparison I could think of, because those are two totally different vehicles, but you know what I'm getting at. Like a Chevy S10 pickup may look like a big F-250 if it's smushed down into the improper aspect ratio, or it's just being displayed in the wrong aspect ratio. So again, there's multiple aspect ratios that these systems deal with when working with this digital video. Not having that understanding of that could, again, skew your interpretation and your opinion of the contents of that video if you're not looking for that type of limitation or that type of challenge. Next, our good friend interlaced video. Now, I will say that you probably won't encounter this very often, but it's worth talking about because if you do encounter it, you may not understand what on earth you're looking at. So just to give you a little bit of background, interlace video is a display technique that was commonly used in analog television way back in the tube television days and early video or digital video formats to reduce the bandwidth while maintaining smooth motion. So instead of displaying an entire frame all at once, interlace video splits each frame into two fields. You have an odd field that is sampled horizontally, and usually lines 1, 3, 5. Again, we're talking about those rows of pixels, right, in the aspect ratio. And then we get into the even fields, 2, 4, 6. That contains the even number of horizontals. So you can see here that if these images are not properly processed for interlace video, and you often see this in motion, you can see these jaggy lines because what you're seeing are two images trying to be displayed at the same time. Now, again, this is old technology, but there's a laundromat out there somewhere that you're going to have to get video from that still has a interlaced video, and it's this old system covered in 40 years of dust, and this is the type of information you're going to get off of it. Many of the tools that we work with in video analysis and examination, like Axon Investigate, has a feature to de-interlace a video. And so you can see here, you talk about interpreting a vehicle, if or interpreting a video. This was from, I believe, an in-car camera system in a police cruiser. And I chose this because if you were to use this image and testify in court, could you confidently testify in court what type of sign that is? Or I mean, maybe you couldn't even testify in court that it's a sign. So if you didn't understand by seeing these jaggy lines what you're dealing with, you may not know I need to deinterlace that file. I need to run through that processor so I can, separate these fields out to their separate images. And now I have a far better idea of the type of, it is a sign. It's a merge sign, is what I would guess, and feel pretty confident in guessing as well. So, um, just kind of to wrap this up, this lives in the analog world. You most likely won't see it too often, but it is by far one of those aspects and those details. It is out there, and again, pretty easy to identify if you're looking for it, especially when you see these jaggy lines. Um, Now, this image is probably blown out a little more than most because it was in a moving camera on the dash of a police cruiser. Oftentimes on stationary cameras, you may see these jaggy lines just around the edges of any objects that are moving in that video. So again, just something to keep in mind looking at it. When we're talking about that interpretation, I've seen a use case where there was a use of force that was trying to be determined by he was a video expert, but not this type of video, somebody that made commercials for television and stuff like that. He was brought in by a legal team to try and determine the amount of speed that an individual was taken down and hit the ground, and it was interlaced. And he was doing these measurements in the video by, let's pretend this is the individual in that video, and he was saying, well, this is his nose, so I'm going to measure the distance that his nose travels in this video from A to B, and calculate how much time it takes to get there. And of course, the other side, whether I don't remember if it was prosecution or defense, they brought in the expert and says, how on earth can you say that this is that guy's nose when it is so blown out and so distorted from this interlacing? You're We're going to throw out your testimony, and we're going to throw out your tests and your evidence that you presented because you clearly don't know what you're talking about. So again, that perfect example of, having a misinterpretation of the contents of a video and rendering a bad opinion because that individual didn't understand this particular topic. And of course, unfortunately, had to sit on the stand in court and can only assume be rather embarrassed when another expert said, you don't know what you're talking about. I don't want that to happen to any of you, any of us, ever. Nobody wants that. All right, this is probably one of my favorite topics to talk about because this is very common. Um, Dealing with video that works with artificial uh, light source, primarily an infrared light. Um, I worked on a number of cases at the crime lab here in Denver where there was misinterpretation and missed opinions based on video that was recorded in a night vision shot using an artificial infrared light source. Um, I think it's pretty plain to see where I'm going with this. I have an image of a little person's room that has lots of colors and lots of patterns. When you introduce that infrared light and that artificial light source, and you introduce a night vision filter on the camera, you lose a lot of information that someone may misinterpret and render an opinion on. For example, it would be easy for any one of us to sit in court and say, what color, is that bed sheet on that bed? And say, well, it's white. Um, is it? No, it is far from white. The reason why this happens is again that fabricated, that artificial light reacts differently with different elements, especially natural versus synthetic fabrics. I know I worked a case at one point here where we had some individuals that burglarized a marijuana dispensary. And the investigators went and they looked at the video and they came back to me and they said, hey, I want you to go and get this video and I want you to provide me images of the three suspects. So I went and got the video and I sat down and I started performing my examination, and I only saw two. And I kept going back to that detective. I don't see a third person. I don't understand why you're asking me to see a third person. Well, it turns out one of the cameras that was looked at was, had this night vision shot on and this infrared light. And there was this crazy pattern in one of the individual's jackets that you could not see in the regular, color images from the other cameras. So they made this determination that there were three individuals there when in fact there was just two, and one of them looked a lot different in this IR setting with the night vision shot on. So um, again, just to kind of point out a couple of different things, how light colors may look dark, dark colors may look light. We lose color information over here on the shelves. It's just one of those things that there's a different approach that you could take to this. You could go back and get images and video from that same exact camera and that same system with the light turned on, and then you can kind of, run your own tests and say, okay, this is actually this and this. Or you would just avoid rendering any type of opinion on colors like the plague, and simply say, this is an IR light. I cannot confidently render an opinion or any type of interpretation of colors or patterns or anything of that nature because of this fabricated or this um, artificial light source. So um, pretty cool. It's one of my favorite things to present. So the next is frame rates. Now, what the frame rate is video is created by a series of stills or frames that are played back at a determined speed, or as we're referring to it now, rate. Now, I'm not sure how well this is displaying on your end since we're on Zoom and we're broadcasting, so to speak, these images. So this may look far better on my screen than it does yours. But I believe you'll have the ability to access this PowerPoint and or PDF to see how this really looks. Because what we're looking at is the difference in motion between images that are played back at 60 frames per second, 30 frames per second, 15 frames per second. And you can see here in this example, we see a very low frame rate that looks like this herky-jerky kind of video. Kind of similar to compression, frame rates can be set and adjusted on the DVR systems themselves in order to store the most amount of video and retain it for the same amount of time. I believe we talked about this, or I addressed this in my other webinar, that the lower the frame rate, the less number of images, the smaller the file size. The smaller the file size, the more information and video you can store on a system. So oftentimes you may find that video that's, oh, perfect. This has got the, you know, perfect camera angle of, the area of interest in my case. And then you find out that it's recording at such a low frame rate that, your subject that ran through that camera, you see them boop, 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 and they're gone. Because that system could be recording at a very low frame rate. So it is very important that a file is played back at its original recorded frame rate for motion to appear correctly. If the file plays at a higher rate, things may seem to be sped up or in a faster motion. If it plays at a lower frame rate, it could be shown as looking in slow motion. Again, not understanding this could lead to a misinterpretation of the events that are taking place in the images or the videos that we're watching. This is incredibly important, again, for speed determination. There are such things as variable frame rates. Now, I won't go into the weeds on variable frame rates, but just to give you kind of a high-level explanation, a variable frame rate acts in a manner that determines when to record the most amount of images at any given time. If you can think of a stationary camera above your door that's recording, your front yard. If nothing's happening and nothing's moving and there's nothing triggering any motion events in your system could lower the frame rate and only record 5 images per second until it detects the car driving by in front of your house and then says, hey, I detect motion, kick that 5 frames per second up to 30 frames per second. So again, important thing to know when you're analyzing the DVR or the CCTV system itself to make note of if something is set at a variable frame rate. Because again, you could be analyzing a video where the first half of the video is at a lower frame rate than the second half of the video. Just important things to know and to understand and to look for. Again, we're talking about vehicle speeds, use of force, reaction time, how long it took an individual or an officer to draw their weapon or pull the trigger, time between two events. Well, I saw this. I parked my car there, and then my car was immediately stolen. Well, it actually, your car was parked there for a little while. The system kicked down to a low frame rate, and then it went to a higher frame rate when the individual showed up and broke in and stole the car. So it kind of looks like the car was sitting there for 5 minutes when it was actually sitting there overnight. So a lot of different things that can come into play, but most commonly we see frame rates anywhere from 7 to 30 frames per second. Some of the newer higher definition systems, you may be seeing 60 seconds or 60 frames per second. But again, often what we're dealing with is somewhere between 7 and 30 frames per second. Next thing, I won't go too detailed because I personally don't have a lot of experience, but this is referring to how video is captured by that particular camera and that camera's interaction with the system, mainly dealing with the shutter. So there's a couple of different types of shutters that exist out there. And what this animation is showing you is what's called a rolling shutter. So as the video is captured and recorded by the system, it's keeping that image up and then capturing just this block of information and changing it. So you could essentially find yourself in a scenario where you're reviewing a frame of video that actually has the top half of one image and the bottom half of another image. Um, Again, I don't have a whole lot to address on this just because of my lack of experience dealing with shutters, because normally this is where you find your metrologists that work with speed determination, car accidents, and traffic related stuff. They're going to be very interested in understanding the shutter of a camera and how it may affect the video that they're viewing. Now, there are tools out there, one of them being a variable frame rate light board. This is a really cool invention. Basically, what this is obviously you've got an LED board that flashes images in a particular pattern in a sequence. You can put that board up in front of a camera and record X amount of video of that pattern, of that board doing what it's doing. Then using a feature inside of Axon Investigate, you can launch this feature that actually reviews that pattern and can tell you exactly what the frame rate is between any one or any two given images or frames. And it gives you this very specific breakdown. And then the best part, it can provide you the timing in between frames with your sample duration as well as a margin of error within plus or minus 1.3 milliseconds. So if you are the type of individual that you're going to interpret some video and render an opinion on speed and do some tests and some work, this tool would be greatly beneficial to your work because again, a margin of error of 1.3 milliseconds, that's a hard thing to argue in court with this type of report to bring to the stand and say, here's my math, here's where I got this information, and like a good student, we're going to show all our work. And yeah, again, it's mainly for speed, use of force cases, those types of scenarios. So just another cool thing. Go check it out, do some research, maybe find some pre-recorded material on those the variable frame rate light boards. But awesome new technology that's out there. Okay, I am going to take a drink real quick because I've been talking nonstop for probably 40 minutes. And we're going to get into our last topic. And this is the common misconception of video evidence. Our friends in Hollywood uh, would like us to think that any one of us can be a forensic expert and any one of us can zoom and enhance. That's why I had stated earlier that not my favorite phrase, but we can zoom and enhance, and we can read the license plate, 4 blocks away from the camera and go get the bad guys. This is not true. One thing that I'll ever say, and I don't want to ruin anybody's CSI fandom or anything like that, but if you ever watch those shows and somebody's doing video work and they're clacking around on their keyboard, unless they're writing their report, you don't need a keyboard to work with any of these video applications. So I always kind of laugh. I don't like watching any of those shows, probably because I've looked behind the curtain too much. I know too much about this type of forensic science that it just makes me mad when I see it on TV. But it is a thing that is referred to as the CSI effect, and we see it in our jurors. Our jurors come to court thinking that they are forensic experts. Oh, I saw this once on, I don't know, NCIS. I don't know if that's one of those shows. I think so. But anyway, that they think that this stuff can easily be found because video is technology and technology has no limitations, right? False. If that was true, I would not be talking to you today. But perfect example is license plates. I probably fielded hundreds of license plates requests from investigators while at the Denver Police Department Crime Lab, and I solved one. One time I was able to get a good read on a license. It wasn't even a license plate, it was a Department of Transportation number on the side of a tow truck. But video is what you see is what you get. Oftentimes, if you start out with garbage video, it is garbage in, garbage out. There is very little that can be done to an image of this quality that'll ever give anybody even the slightest hint of what that license plate could be. So um, try not to waste too much time on it if you're trying to figure out a detail that you really want to hang your hat on, because the harder you work, the easier it may be to accidentally misinterpret what you're seeing if you just apply so many filters and so many enhancements to something that you just make it a million times worse. And that's a hole that we don't want to dig ourselves out of. So common misconceptions. People like to think that video is the perfect silent witness. I would argue this every day. Obviously, as we've seen over the last 40 minutes, it is not the perfect silent witness. There can be a lot of things in video that can, push us in the wrong directions and make those wrong interpretations and render those false opinions. Um, One thing that I will give to video is video does not forget as fast as a human being or an eyewitness may be. I remember during my training at the crime lab, I was out on a ride along midday. Bank robbery happened, and I heard all the radio chatter of the officers trying to figure out a description of the individual that they needed to be looking for. And this individual's clothing changed probably 5 times in 10 minutes. Was he wearing a hat? Was he wearing what kind of hat was he wearing? What color was his hat? Did he have a jacket on? Did he not? I mean, it changed so often until I remember a very kind of annoyed sergeant got on the radio and said, "Will somebody please go look at the video and tell us who we're looking for?" Because the video isn't going to forget, right? It might not always display the information properly, but you could probably go back 4 hours, 4 weeks, maybe even 4 months, and that same story is going to be told by that video and that CCTV system because it doesn't forget. So, enhancements rarely provide value. As I already stated, we talked about license plates. Most are edge cases, like my Department of Transportation number on the side of that tow truck. Um, Video, as we just talked about, significant technical challenges. It's not that perfect silent witness. Video evidence is often dismissed when incorrectly managed, process, reviewed. This is what I was talking about earlier. Um, Simply pressing play can cause manipulations in your video and lead to this misinterpretation. So it is very important to get the proper training, to do the research, to understand your subject matter. Again, so we avoid these wrongful interpretations, these wrongful opinions, and we don't land in the hot seat because we've incorrectly managed, processed, or reviewed that video. So a couple of certifications and trainings that you can get. We here at Axon provide operator examiner and metrologist certification training using Axon Investigate. So it is application specific, but we do cover a lot of the best practices and kind of the forensic video examination theory that I kind of mentioned over the last hour or so. Um, so that all can be up there, and learned about specific to that application. So something, if you want to look into, we have some great trainers that do that type of the type of certification training. LEVA, the Law Enforcement Emergency Services Video Association, that's who I hold my technician certification from. These are courses that are taught by the best of the best in the world. They are the ones who will tell you about compression in a 4-hour class. They will tell you what JPEG stands for, why JPEG stands for what it does, and who invented JPEG. Um, a lot of important, very skill-based training. I cannot recommend that organization enough. And then the International Association for Identification, IAI, they also have a forensic video certification that they provide. If I remember correctly, I do not hold a certification from IAI, but I believe it's self-taught. So you get your book, you learn about it, you test it. If you pass, you get your certification. LEVA is taught in person. They have labs, they have instructors. It's all tested, um, and then provides that certification. So again, do the research, uh, go out on your own, look into this stuff, get some training, attend more webinars, come see us at Axon about Axon Investigate if that's a tool that you're interested in. With that, I will take a break. I will say thank you. I appreciate everyone's attention. I am very much looking forward to the Q&A that's coming up. And again, thank you, Tina and Nicole, for having me today.
Well, thank you, Casey's, for sharing your expertise and your time. We do have one question before we jump over into the discussion room. And this might be something that we can discuss further in the discussion room, in case anybody in the audience who plans on attending has some information to shed on this too. And I'll read the question for the sake of those who are watching the video and not able to attend right now live with us. So the question is, who makes the rules that departments must follow when editing body-worn camera recordings? Is it the department? Is it DA investigator? Is it third parties?
I'm sorry, is the question specifically to just monitoring body-worn cameras?
That's what's in the question. If the
Okay.
person who asked it wants to add anything more, but it specifically says body worn cameras.
So to my knowledge, and I will start with that I'm not the leading expert on body worn cameras or body worn camera um, uh, at agencies, but um, there are, from video specifically, there are a number of scientific working groups that work to kind of establish the kind of the base level of what is video examination, etc. Now, those are the one specifically SWIGD, which is Scientific Working Group of Digital Evidence. Now, oftentimes those type of groups kind of help shape what most agencies' standard operating procedures are based off of, and lab quality assurance programs, etc. Now, speaking specifically to body-worn cameras, um, I would, if I had to guess, I would guess that it is set by the agency itself. I'm sure there are probably standard operating procedures and best practices that are universal when working with body-worn cameras. Now, I know that we have Axon products that are specific to individuals that are supposed to be monitoring cameras, that log information of this many cameras were watched on this day, et cetera, that hold an agency responsible uh, for their rules and their procedures that they put in place. Um, I'd have to, yeah, forgive me. I'm not an expert on the entire Axon ecosystem. Um, but yeah, I know that there is, I think it's within evidence.com or the body worn program that, yeah, sets those standards of, these sergeants or whomever is responsible for that should be watching X amount of video in any given day. And that feature within the Axon ecosystem holds them to that and will alert their supervisor if that's not happening. So I will try and figure out exactly what that is referred to. I believe it's axon performance, if I'm not mistaken, but I can look that up real quick at some point. So
And he did provide clarification. It was BWC, dash cam, ring, so various sorts, the editing.
okay. Yeah, so I mean, as far as who's supposed to be watching what, more generalized, it would be identified in the standard operating procedures, the SOPs of any given specific agency, what they expect of their officers um, and their employees. Again, there very well could be kind of universal foundations that those are built off of. Because I know most law enforcement agencies, they don't want to be the outliers where they're doing something totally different from somebody else. But yeah, I would I feel pretty confident saying that it's up to the agency and their specific SOPs that they follow.
Okay, thank you. It's just after 3 o'clock, and so we are going to jump over into the discussion. And so thanks again, Casey. For those of you who would like to join the discussion, the link to that meeting room is in the chat. You should not need a meeting ID or passcode to enter. You should just be able to click the link and you're automatically going to be put into a waiting room until I can get off the webinar and get there. So I will keep that up. So you have the opportunity to do that. Before we leave, I just want to mention a few things. Within 5 days, reminder, within 5 days of today, you will receive a email follow-up, following up on this webinar. And so included in that email, among other things, will be a link to submit, if you're in the CPO program, your hours. There will be uh, information on how to access this webinar recording, and then there will be a link to the slides that Casey used today during the webinar. And just a reminder again, Casey did present the initial webinar related to digital video evidence back in September 2023. It's available on the NACOLE website under the training tab under webinars. And then if you don't know, the annual NACOLE conference this year will be in Minneapolis, and it is October 26th through the 30th. We will be posting or releasing the call for proposals next week. And so if anyone is interested in submitting a proposal for the conference, please do so. And then pass the word on too if you know of anybody else who might want to present or be a good presenter for the conference. All right. So those of you who wish to join us in the discussion room, I will hold on and give you an opportunity to do that. Someone has asked to post the link again. So let me respond to that. So you have it. And also at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat bubble. And so if you click on that, the link to the Zoom discussion is in there. Okay. And I just provided it in response to the question that was asked about posting it again. So hopefully you'll see it in either place. Okay. And I'm going to hang on until I see everybody has had the chance to click the meeting link for the discussion. So Casey, if something happens along the way and you don't get taken into that Zoom room, just call me.
Okay,
I'll email
I'm
it
gonna
to you.
bounce over there right now.
Okay. And I'll be there in a moment.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you at the next training or event or out in this oversight world. I see a few more people, and so I will wait just a little bit longer in case anybody who is still on here wants to join the Zoom discussion. I will wait another few seconds. I see just a few more people, just in case you are attempting to get over into the Zoom discussion room.